What if the stories you were taught to dismiss were never fiction at all? Imagine a gaze so powerful it could freeze life itself, like the tale of Medusa, turning beings into stone in an instant. Picture an entire island civilization vanishing beneath the waves in a single day, leaving no trace behind. Envision sailors unknowingly stepping onto the back of a colossal kraken, believing it to be solid ground, only to face the unimaginable. For centuries, these accounts were brushed aside with one convenient label: myth. But what happens when evidence begins to surface again and again, forcing experts to question everything they thought they knew? These are not just stories. They are echoes of a past that refuses to stay buried. Stay with us, because what you are about to discover may completely change how you see history and the truth hidden within it. In the year 1950, two Danish peat cutters were working through a bog in central Denmark when their routine labor suddenly came to a halt. Something unusual had appeared beneath their tools. As they cleared away the dark soil, a human face emerged, staring back at them with an uncanny lifelike presence. Its preservation was so remarkable that the men immediately contacted the police, convinced they had uncovered the victim of a recent crime. What they had actually found, however, was far older than anyone expected. The remains dated back nearly 2,000 years. For generations, stories from Celtic and Germanic cultures spoke of ritual sacrifices carried out to honor and satisfy their gods. Bogs were not random locations for such acts. Across northern Europe, these wetlands were believed to be sacred thresholds, mysterious spaces where the human realm met something beyond ordinary understanding. Offerings placed into these waters included weapons, treasured objects, and at times even human lives. Over time, many scholars dismissed these traditions, suggesting they were exaggerated accounts created by Roman writers to portray northern societies as uncivilized and justify their expansion. That skepticism began to fade when the preserved body known as Tolland Man was brought to light. The evidence told a clear and undeniable story. A finely crafted leather noose still rested around his neck, tied with careful intention. Analysis revealed his final meal had been a simple serving of grain porridge consumed shortly before his death. His body had been positioned with remarkable attention, limbs arranged neatly and eyes gently closed, suggesting a deliberate and respectful placement. This discovery did not resemble punishment or misfortune. Instead, every detail aligned closely with the ceremonial practices once described in ancient accounts. His calm expression, almost as if he were peacefully asleep, hinted at something deeper. It appeared that those who placed him there believed they were performing a meaningful act, sending him onward with care into a realm they trusted existed beyond their own. For hundreds of years, the most influential figures of the ancient world refused to make important decisions without seeking guidance from a single woman seated within a stone chamber in Greece. Kings, military leaders, and rulers journeyed across vast distances, sometimes traveling for weeks, just to reach her. They offered immense wealth in exchange for her words. Entire wars were initiated, campaigns were halted, and the direction of civilizations shifted based on the statements she delivered while positioned on a bronze tripod above a fissure in the ground. For a long time, historians dismissed this practice as mere spectacle. They believed it was a carefully crafted act, with a priestess speaking in cryptic phrases while surrounding officials transformed her words into influence and profit. It was widely assumed that no divine force was involved and that the process was nothing more than performance. This raised an important question about what truly occurred in that chamber. Scientific investigation eventually provided a surprising explanation. Geologists studied the structure beneath the chamber floor and discovered that two fault lines met directly below the oracle's seat. These geological features released ethylene gas, a naturally occurring substance with a mild, sweet scent. In small amounts, this gas can create feelings of euphoria, confusion, and altered awareness. The woman known as the Pythia was not acting out a role. Each time she took her place, she was breathing in this invisible influence rising from the earth itself. Her visions and pronouncements were shaped by a natural phenomenon beneath her feet. In this way, the course of Greek civilization, including its conflicts, expansions, and political choices, was influenced in part by a hidden force of nature. The voice people trusted did not come from the heavens above. It emerged from the ground below. Across vast distances, from Egypt to China and from Arabia to Persia, different cultures shared a strikingly similar story. Each told of a magnificent bird that rose again after being consumed by fire. These societies had little to no contact with one another, yet the same narrative appeared again and again. Scholars of mythology eventually labeled it as a shared solar system, suggesting there was no deeper mystery. The explanation seemed simple. The sun disappears each night and returns every morning. So the story reflected a universal pattern rather than a real event. This interpretation remained widely accepted until naturalists began closely observing the behavior of actual birds. Some species displayed actions involving smoke, ash, and heat that seemed unusual without proper understanding. They would extend their wings, remain completely still, and expose their feathers to rising warmth, creating the impression that they were deliberately placing themselves into fire. To an untrained observer, such behavior could appear almost ritualistic. In ancient Egypt, priests were known to keep a large heron species called the Bennu within temple grounds at Heliopolis. Over many generations, ceremonial practices involving fire were carried out in the presence of this bird. For those witnessing these events in ancient times, the sight of a large bird standing calmly amid heat and smoke would have been difficult to interpret as ordinary animal behavior. It may have seemed as though the creature was enduring flames without harm, giving the illusion of destruction followed by renewal. The idea of a bird reborn from fire may not have originated as a simple invention or symbolic story told for meaning alone. Instead, it could have emerged from real observations shaped by ritual, environment, and perception. What appeared to be a mythical rebirth may have been a misunderstood but genuine moment, witnessed and remembered across generations as something extraordinary. In 1938, archaeologists working near Baghdad uncovered objects that seemed completely out of place in a layer of earth dating back 2,000 years. These items were small clay jars, each holding a copper cylinder with an iron rod positioned at its center. Their design appeared simple, yet strangely purposeful. Curious about their function, one researcher decided to experiment by filling one of the jars with vinegar. The result was unexpected. The jar generated a small amount of electricity, roughly 1 volt, but the effect was consistent and measurable. This discovery raised serious questions. These objects had been created by human hands nearly 17 centuries before Alessandro Volta received recognition for inventing the modern battery. Faced with this possibility, historians searched for more comfortable explanations. They suggested the jars might have been used for storage, ritual purposes, or perhaps were the result of accidental chemical reactions. The idea that ancient people could have intentionally harnessed electrical effects was largely dismissed. Further investigation brought new evidence into the discussion. Metallurgists studied gold artifacts from the same region and time period. On several silver objects, they found extremely thin and evenly applied layers of gold. These coatings did not match any known gilding methods from that era. Instead, they closely resembled electroplating, a process that relies on electrical current to deposit metal with precision. This raised a compelling possibility. In Parthian Mesopotamia, people may have discovered a natural force they could not fully explain, yet still managed to use it with surprising skill. They may not have had a word for electricity, but the jars functioned then just as they do when tested today. The results suggest a level of practical understanding that challenges long-held assumptions about ancient knowledge and capability. Imagine a grand dining hall that moved without pause, turning gently through the hours of day and night. Guests would sit and dine while the floor beneath them slowly revolved, while the ceiling above remained still. This careful design created a striking illusion, as if the sky itself was shifting around those gathered below. For a long time, historians treated this story with doubt. The Emperor Nero was known for extreme behavior, and the writer Suetonius was famous for vivid storytelling. Bringing these two together seemed to produce an account that sounded more like exaggeration than reality. The idea that ancient Romans could construct a rotating dining space appeared unreasonable and easy to dismiss. That certainty began to weaken when archaeologists started excavating beneath the Appian Hill in Rome. What they uncovered challenged long-held assumptions. Beneath the ruins, they found the remains of a circular mechanical system designed with remarkable precision. Large spherical elements had been built to support significant weight, suggesting the structure above had been both massive and carefully balanced. Alongside this, there was a network of channels that allowed water to flow continuously beneath the platform. This hydraulic system was not decorative. It served a functional purpose, enabling the movement of the structure above while the surrounding building stayed completely still. The engineering clearly indicated that the platform had once rotated, just as described in ancient accounts. This discovery confirmed that, during the 1st century, such a remarkable room truly existed within an imperial residence. The purpose was not necessity, but spectacle. Nero sought to impress and overwhelm his guests, creating an environment where they would feel as though the entire universe was in motion around them. The rotating chamber was real, and it revealed that the emperor's taste for dramatic display was every bit as extraordinary as the stories suggested. Nearly every ancient civilization shared a powerful account of a great flood that reshaped the world. In different regions and traditions, figures such as Noah, Gilgamesh, Manu, and Deucalion were connected to stories of overwhelming waters that nearly wiped out humanity. These cultures existed thousands of miles apart, with no clear communication between them. Yet their narratives carried striking similarities. For a long time, scholars offered a simple and reassuring explanation. Flood stories appeared everywhere because floods themselves were common. Rivers overflowed, lands were submerged, and early societies transformed these natural disasters into symbolic tales of divine judgment. According to this view, there was nothing unusual about the repetition of such stories. That explanation began to feel less certain when a new idea emerged in 1997. Two marine geologists suggested a dramatic event that may have taken place around 5600 BCE. At that time, the Mediterranean Sea might have broken through into a much smaller freshwater basin located where the Black Sea exists today. This was not a gradual change. The incoming water likely surged with immense force, comparable to countless waterfalls pouring in at once. Shorelines would have vanished. Entire settlements could have been submerged, and a vast region, roughly the size of modern Florida, may have been permanently flooded. Such an event would have caused widespread panic and displacement. People would have fled in every direction, carrying with them stories of what they had witnessed. Over generations, these accounts may have spread across distant lands, shaping the traditions of many cultures. What if these ancient flood stories were not simply imaginative creations? What if they were shared memories of a real and devastating event? Rather than repeating a fictional idea, these civilizations may have been preserving the same experience of fear, loss, and survival across time. The Quran speaks of Iram of the Pillars, a place described as rich, powerful, and suddenly destroyed, vanishing so completely that no trace seemed to remain. For many centuries, scholars interpreted this account as a moral lesson rather than a historical event. The idea of an entire city disappearing in a single moment appeared unrealistic, as history rarely records such sudden and total destruction. This perspective began to shift during the 1990s, when satellite imagery uncovered an unusual pattern in the desert of Oman. Ancient caravan paths and long-used trade routes, followed for generations, all appeared to converge toward one specific location hidden beneath the sands. This discovery drew the attention of archaeologists, who decided to investigate further. Excavations at the site revealed the remains of a settlement known as Ubar, once an important center in the trade of frankincense, a valuable commodity in the ancient world. As research continued, scientists looked beyond the visible ruins and examined the ground beneath the city. What they found offered a remarkable explanation. The settlement had been constructed over a layer of limestone that concealed a large underground cavity. Over many years, groundwater gradually eroded the rock below, creating an expanding hollow space. Eventually, the structure above could no longer be supported. At some point, the surface collapsed. Buildings, walls, and towers fell downward into the void beneath them, in what appears to have been a sudden and devastating event. Geological evidence suggests that this collapse may have occurred around the 3rd century, bringing destruction in a single dramatic moment. This finding gave new meaning to the ancient account. Rather than being purely symbolic, the story may reflect the memory of those who witnessed the event. To them, the disappearance of an entire city into the ground would have seemed beyond explanation. With no scientific understanding available, they described what they saw in the only way they could, preserving the moment as a powerful narrative passed down through time. Troy was once described as a city of immense strength and influence, so significant that even after its fall, Greek writers continued to speak of it for nearly 1,000 years. Their accounts told of towering defensive walls, a prolonged siege lasting a decade, and a final destruction so complete that the city passed into legend. Over time, the story became so dramatic that many historians chose to dismiss it as fiction. The idea that an entire civilization could be reduced to ashes over the abduction of a single woman seemed too exaggerated to accept as history. That skepticism remained until a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann decided to take the ancient writings seriously. Using the descriptions found in the works attributed to Homer as a guide, he began excavating a site known as Hisarlik in present-day Turkey. What he uncovered challenged long-standing assumptions. Beneath the surface, he found not just one city, but multiple layers of settlement. One after another, cities had been built on the same ground, each rising from the ruins left behind by the previous one. In total, 9 distinct layers were identified, each representing a different period of habitation. Among them, the 7th layer stood out. This level revealed clear signs of violent destruction. Structures had been burned, human remains were scattered, and arrowheads were discovered embedded in the walls, suggesting intense conflict. The evidence pointed to a catastrophic event that brought this version of the city to an end. Dating of this destruction aligned closely with the period traditionally associated with the Trojan War. This connection suggested that the ancient accounts may have been rooted in real events rather than pure imagination. Troy was not merely a story passed down through generations. It was a place that existed, experienced devastation, and left behind traces strong enough to endure through time, confirming that the past may hold more truth than once believed. Every powerful civilization seems to carry an origin story that feels almost impossible to believe. In the case of Rome, the tale speaks of 2 abandoned infant brothers left near the Palatine Hill, where they were discovered and nursed by a she-wolf inside a cave. According to the story, a shepherd later found the children and raised them, and they eventually grew into the founders of one of the greatest empires the Western world had ever known. For generations, historians dismissed this account as symbolic storytelling. The wolf was seen as a metaphor, the abandonment as a literary device, and the entire narrative as a form of political myth shaped to inspire identity and pride. Over time, however, researchers studying animal behavior began to notice something that earlier scholars had not seriously considered. While rare, there are documented cases in which wolves have taken in human children. These instances have been recorded in regions such as India, France, and Lithuania, where children were found living among wolf packs. Observations showed that these children often displayed behaviors similar to those of wolves. They moved on all fours, consumed raw food, and responded to the sounds and signals used by the animals around them. These reports were carefully noted by doctors and officials whose responsibility depended on accuracy. Further study revealed that a female wolf that has recently lost her own young may sometimes accept another infant in their place. Her instinct to nurture can extend beyond her own species when certain conditions are met. Warmth, size, and scent can be close enough to trigger a response of care and protection. This raises an intriguing possibility. The detail in the Roman story that seemed most unlikely may actually have a basis in real behavior. What was long considered pure imagination might reflect an event that truly occurred. The beginnings of Rome, a civilization that shaped much of the known world, may trace back to a moment inside a wolf shelter, where an animal unknowingly played a role in a future far beyond its awareness. In ancient Greek tradition, Medusa was believed to possess a terrifying power, the ability to turn anyone who looked directly at her into stone. For centuries, historians approached this story as symbolism, interpreting it as a reflection of fear, danger, and the idea of overwhelming force embodied in a single figure. It was analyzed as literature, rich in meaning and psychological depth. Yet one simpler possibility was rarely considered. What if people in the ancient world witnessed something real that seemed to transform living creatures into stone? A place like Lake Natron offers a compelling comparison. Its waters are extremely alkaline, creating conditions that can preserve animals in a striking way. When birds, bats, or small creatures die there, their bodies can become rigid and lifelike, appearing almost as if they have been turned into stone. To someone unfamiliar with the science behind it, the sight would be both mysterious and unsettling. In earlier times, travelers around the Mediterranean encountered lakes with similarly harsh chemical properties. They may have seen animals approach these waters, only to later find their remains hardened and unmoving along the shoreline. Without knowledge of chemistry or geology, such observations would have been difficult to explain. In that context, the idea of a figure like Medusa could offer a more understandable explanation than the unseen forces at work. The transformation they witnessed seemed immediate and absolute, giving rise to a story that captured the fear and confusion of the moment. The legend may not have been created simply as a tale of a monstrous being, but as an attempt to describe an experience that defied understanding. What appeared to be a curse could have been the result of a natural environment that few survived long enough to truly explain. The story of Lycaon stands among the most unsettling tales in Greek tradition. It speaks of a king driven by arrogance, bold enough to challenge Zeus himself. According to the account, Lycaon prepared a shocking test. During a royal banquet, he served a meal made from human flesh, believing he could deceive the god. Zeus immediately recognized the act, reacted with overwhelming fury, destroyed the palace, and transformed the king into a wolf as punishment. For generations, this narrative was understood as symbolic. It became associated with the origins of the werewolf legend and was interpreted as a warning about pride, disrespect toward the divine, and the consequences of crossing sacred boundaries. The disturbing feast was rarely taken as a literal event. Instead, it was viewed as a dramatic element designed to convey moral lessons. That interpretation began to shift when archaeologists explored a site linked directly to the story. On the summit of Mount Lycaon in Greece, a sanctuary long believed to be dedicated to Zeus was carefully excavated. Ancient writings had already mentioned the importance of this location, so its discovery itself was not unexpected. What surprised researchers was what they found within the remains of the altar. Among the layers of ash, there were burned bones. These included not only animal remains typical of sacrificial practices, but also human bones mixed together in a similar pattern. The findings were dated to approximately 3,000 years ago. This was not an isolated occurrence. The evidence suggested that such actions had taken place repeatedly, becoming part of the ritual activity at the site over time. This discovery raises difficult questions. The story of Lycaon may not have been created simply as a warning against unthinkable behavior. Instead, it may have served as an explanation for practices that people already knew had occurred. What was once dismissed as myth could reflect a deeper reality, one rooted in events that left a lasting impression on those who witnessed or remembered them across the world. Cultures that lived near wetlands and marshes shared a strangely similar story. They spoke of glowing lights drifting through the darkness at night, faint and bluish, moving without any clear pattern. Sometimes these lights seemed to approach travelers, while at other times they appeared to guide people away from safe paths and into deep, dangerous waters. In Britain, they became known as will-o'-the-wisp. In Germany, they were called Irrlichter. In Japan, people referred to them as Hitodama. Different regions and languages described the same eerie presence with remarkably consistent behavior. For a long time, scholars believed these stories were simply expressions of human fear. They were interpreted as symbolic warnings, shaped by imagination, and used to caution people about the dangers of traveling through dark and unstable terrain. According to this view, the lights were not real phenomena, but reflections of anxiety and the unknown. This understanding began to change when scientists studied the natural conditions of wetlands more closely. Atmospheric chemists discovered that decaying organic material in marshy environments produces gases such as methane and phosphine. Under certain conditions, these gases can rise from the ground and ignite spontaneously upon contact with the air. When this happens, small flickering flames appear, often with a bluish glow. These lights do not move in a steady or predictable way. They shift with air currents, drift towards sources of warmth, and can appear or disappear suddenly without leaving any trace behind. To someone walking through a marsh at night, the sight would seem both mysterious and unsettling. Ancient travelers who encountered these glowing forms had no scientific explanation for what they were seeing. Without knowledge of chemistry or natural gas reactions, they turned to storytelling to make sense of the experience. They gave these lights names and passed down warnings through generations, advising others to avoid the marshlands where such strange and deceptive visions could lead them into danger. Norse sailors did not speak of the kraken as a simple creature. They described something so immense that it resembled an island rising from the open sea. According to their accounts, ships would approach it with confidence, drop anchor beside it, and even settle upon its surface as if it were solid ground. Then, without warning, the surface would shift, the illusion would break, and everything would be pulled beneath the water. For centuries, historians dismissed these stories with ease. It seemed obvious that sailors, known for dramatic storytelling, had allowed imagination to shape their memories, and living being large enough to be mistaken for land appeared too extraordinary to accept as truth. That certainty began to weaken when the giant squid was confirmed as a real species. Known scientifically as Archaeoteuthis, it can grow to astonishing lengths of around 45 feet, with eyes as large as basketballs, designed to function in the deepest darkness of the ocean. This alone challenged earlier assumptions about what could exist beneath the surface. Further evidence came from encounters with sperm whales. These massive animals have been found bearing deep circular scars across their bodies, marks left by powerful suction cups far larger than any known surface creature could produce. These injuries suggest intense battles taking place far below where human observation is possible, involving organisms of remarkable size and strength. What makes this even more intriguing is how little has been directly witnessed. A fully grown giant squid in its natural environment remains largely unseen. Its existence is confirmed not by observation in open water, but by the traces it leaves behind on creatures capable of surviving such encounters. Long ago, Norse sailors navigating the dark and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic may have come across something real, something vast enough to inspire fear and wonder. Their descriptions were not necessarily exaggerations, but attempts to explain encounters with a presence they could not fully understand. The legend endured because the experience behind it was powerful, even if those who witnessed it were never able to return and prove what they had seen. The story of Excalibur rests on two powerful images that have shaped its legend for generations. One tells of a sword drawn from solid stone by the only individual worthy enough to claim it. The other describes the final moment of a dying king, casting the blade into a lake where a mysterious hand rises from the water, catches it, and pulls it beneath the surface forever. For a long time, historians viewed these scenes as elements of medieval storytelling. The tales of King Arthur were considered political creations, designed to give early Britain a sense of noble origin and identity. In this view, the sword was simply a narrative symbol, and the figure in the water represented nothing more than poetic imagination. That perspective began to shift when archaeologists examined what had actually been recovered from waterways across Britain over many years of excavation and dredging. From rivers, lakes, and bogs, they uncovered hundreds of swords. These weapons came from different periods, including the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and later times. What stood out was not just their number, but the way they had been placed. These were not items accidentally lost or discarded after battle. They had been deliberately set into the water with care. Further analysis by specialists in ancient metals revealed something even more striking. Many of these swords were of exceptional quality, crafted with skill and maintained in excellent condition. They were not broken or useless objects thrown away. Instead, they appeared to have been returned at the height of their value and effectiveness. This pattern suggests a deeper cultural practice. The act of placing such weapons into water may have been a ritual, a way of giving back something powerful rather than keeping it. The figure often imagined as the Lady of the Lake may not represent a literal being, but rather the tradition itself, a symbolic reflection of this repeated action. In this light, Excalibur may not have been a single legendary sword. It may represent all the remarkable weapons that were once offered to the waters, remembered collectively through a story that preserved their significance across time. The Hanging Gardens are often listed among the greatest wonders of the ancient world. Descriptions speak of lush terraces rising high into the air, filled with greenery, and supported by an advanced system that lifted water upward against the pull of gravity. Ancient writers praised this creation for generations, presenting it as a breathtaking achievement that blended nature with engineering in a way that seemed almost impossible. There was, however, one major difficulty that puzzled historians and archaeologists for many years. Despite extensive excavation in the city of Babylon, no clear trace of these gardens was ever discovered. Researchers uncovered palaces, temples, and many other structures described in historical records, yet the gardens remained absent. This lack of evidence led many to conclude that the story was nothing more than a legend, a beautiful idea imagined by ancient authors rather than a real place. This assumption began to change when an Oxford scholar named Stephanie Dalley revisited the original texts in their earliest languages. By studying the sources more carefully, she identified a critical misunderstanding. The location described in these accounts had been mistranslated over time. The gardens were not situated in Babylon as widely believed. Instead, the evidence pointed toward Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, built under the rule of King Sennacherib around 700 BCE. When the ancient descriptions were compared with the geography of Nineveh, the details began to align. The landscape, the availability of water, and the engineering possibilities all matched what had been written. Further support came from inscriptions left by the king himself, which described an impressive garden complex supported by an advanced aqueduct system. This system transported water from distant mountains, making it possible to sustain large, elevated gardens within the city. The wonder had not been imaginary. It had simply been misplaced in history. For centuries, scholars searched in the wrong location, overlooking the truth that had been preserved in the original accounts all along. Across many ancient traditions, the idea of giants appears again and again. In the Bible, there are the Nephilim. Greek stories speak of the Titans. Norse legends describe frost giants. Cultures separated by distance and time all seem to imagine beings that looked human, but were far larger, stronger, and beyond the usual limits of life. For a long time, historians offered a clear explanation. These figures were symbolic, representing forces greater than human control. They were seen as psychological creations rather than reflections of real individuals. That interpretation began to shift as physical evidence started to emerge. Anthropologists studying skeletal remains from regions across the Middle East, Europe, and Asia identified individuals whose size exceeded what was typical for their time. In societies where the average height was much lower, these discoveries stood out dramatically. One notable example came from Tal el Hammam in Jordan, where a skeleton was found with a femur length, suggesting a height well above 7 feet. Similar findings appeared in places such as Sardinia, Egypt, and the wide Eurasian steppe. These were not isolated anomalies in terms of geography, but they were rare in occurrence. Science provides an explanation through a condition known as gigantism, a medical disorder that can cause individuals to grow far beyond normal proportions. In ancient populations, where average height was significantly shorter, a person with such a condition would have appeared extraordinary, even overwhelming to those around them. This perspective does not suggest the existence of entire civilizations of giants, but it does offer a more grounded understanding of how such stories may have formed. A single unusually tall individual entering a small settlement could easily leave a lasting impression. Over time, that memory could grow, becoming part of storytelling and tradition. What began as an encounter with a rare but real human condition may have evolved into the legends repeated across cultures. The figure of the giant did not need to come from imagination alone. It may have started with someone who truly stood above the rest. Aztec warriors were already known for their strength and intensity in battle, yet some accounts suggested they carried something even more unsettling into combat. It was not a blade or a club, but something that could weaken an enemy before any physical strike was made. For many years, historians dismissed such claims as exaggeration, assuming that every civilization tended to amplify its own fearsome reputation when telling its stories. That view began to change when archaeologists uncovered unusual objects in burial sites across Mexico. These items were small clay whistles, carefully shaped to resemble human skulls. At first, they were simply cataloged as decorative or ceremonial artifacts, with no clear understanding of their purpose. Their true function remained unknown until one of them was tested. When air was blown through the whistle, the sound it produced was nothing like music. It was sharp, unsettling, and disturbingly similar to a human scream. The tone carried a quality that the mind did not interpret as an instrument. Instead, it triggered an immediate sense of alarm. As if danger was approaching, the reaction it created was instinctive, tapping into a deep and primal response. This discovery gave new meaning to the ancient descriptions. The idea that such sounds were used in battle no longer seemed exaggerated. Imagine a large group of warriors advancing in the darkness before sunrise, each one producing that same piercing noise at once. The combined effect would have been overwhelming, creating confusion and fear before any physical confrontation began. This was not simply ritual or performance. It appears to have been a deliberate use of sound as a psychological tool, designed to disrupt and weaken opposition in advance. What had once been labeled as symbolic storytelling began to reveal itself as a practical strategy. For those who faced it, the experience would not have felt like legend. It would have been something far more immediate and terrifying, leaving a lasting impression that words alone could barely capture. For a long time, the story of Jericho was treated as something deliberately unbelievable. Historians dismissed it with confidence, pointing out that walls do not simply collapse because of sound. The account seemed less like a record of real events and more like a dramatic tale shaped to inspire belief, a narrative enhanced over time with powerful imagery. This certainty began to unravel when archaeologists turned their attention to the site known as Tel es Sultan. As excavation progressed, the focus shifted. The issue was no longer the story itself, but the assumptions that had been made about it. Evidence began to surface that challenged long-held skepticism. The remains revealed a city that had been destroyed during the Late Bronze Age, aligning closely with the period described in ancient accounts. Even more striking was the condition of the city walls. Instead of falling inward, as would be expected during a traditional siege, the walls had collapsed outward. This unusual pattern did not match conventional methods of attack and suggested that something different had taken place. Inside the ruins, another detail stood out. Stottern jars were discovered still filled with grain. This finding was significant. In a typical siege, a city is cut off from supplies until its inhabitants weaken from hunger. Food shortages usually mark the final stages of such conflicts. The presence of untouched grain indicated that the city's fall had been sudden, leaving no time for starvation to set in. This combination of evidence points to a rapid and unexpected event. While there is no way to confirm every element of the traditional account, including the role of sound, the physical remains tell a story of their own. The walls did fall, and the city did come to an abrupt end before its resources were consumed. What was once dismissed as impossible now raises new questions. Sometimes the most surprising parts of a story are not the ones imagined, but the ones that remained undiscovered until someone finally looked closely enough to find them. Juan Ponce de Leon did not create the idea of a fountain that restores youth. He encountered the story while traveling through the Caribbean, where different indigenous communities shared similar accounts in their own languages. They spoke of waters that could heal illness, restore energy, and appear to slow the effects of aging. The consistency of these descriptions was strong enough that even cautious Spanish officials took note and recorded what they heard. Over time, historians chose to view these stories as imagination rather than reality. The concept of a single magical spring offering eternal youth seemed too extraordinary to accept, so it was set aside as fantasy. Yet the narrative was never truly centered on one specific place. Instead, it reflected a broader pattern that had gone unrecognized. Certain natural mineral waters contain substances that modern science now understands to have real biological effects. These compounds can reduce inflammation, support recovery, and influence processes connected to aging. People who regularly use such waters often experienced noticeable benefits compared to those who did not. From an outside perspective, the results could easily be interpreted as something almost miraculous. Without the language of chemistry or medicine, ancient observers described what they saw in the most direct way possible. They spoke of a source that restored vitality and preserved youth, because that is how it appeared. The term fountain of youth was not an attempt to deceive, but an effort to explain a visible outcome using the understanding available at the time. Today, modern pharmacology studies and isolates similar compounds, identifying their properties and offering them as treatments, often at significant cost. What was once described through story is now examined through science, yet the underlying effects remain connected. The legend did not arise from a single mythical location. It grew from repeated encounters with natural resources that produced real and beneficial results. Long before scientific terminologies existed, people had already discovered something valuable. even if they could only describe it in the language of wonder and experience. Imagine standing on a quiet shore in the vast Pacific, watching a person push away from land in a small canoe and head straight into the open ocean. To the east lies nothing but endless water, stretching for thousands of kilometers. There is no compass to guide the way, no written map to follow, only knowledge of the stars, the rhythm of ocean swells, and memory passed down through generations. For a long time, European historians heard stories like this and dismissed them as impossible. In their view, simple vessels could not cross the largest ocean on Earth and return safely. These journeys were labeled as myths, tales shaped by imagination rather than real experience. That belief began to fall apart because of one unexpected detail: the sweet potato, a plant originally native to South America, was already being grown across distant Pacific islands by the time Europeans arrived. Its presence created a question that could not be ignored. This crop did not belong there naturally, which meant that someone must have carried it across the ocean long before recorded contact. Further evidence strengthened this conclusion. Advances in genetic research revealed connections between Polynesian populations and indigenous groups from South America. A study published in 2020 showed clear signs of shared ancestry, indicating contact between these regions dating back at least 8 centuries. This discovery confirmed that the exchange was not accidental or recent. The people who made these journeys were not figures of legend or imagination. They were skilled navigators who understood the ocean in ways that others could not. Using environmental cues such as wind patterns, currents, and celestial navigation, they traveled across vast distances with remarkable precision. What was once dismissed as fiction has become recognized as one of the most impressive achievements in human exploration. The evidence had been present all along, quietly waiting to be understood. The presence of the sweet potato served as a lasting reminder that these ancient voyagers accomplished what many once believed could never be done, proving that their knowledge and skill were far greater than history once allowed. For many centuries, traditional Chinese healers offered what they called dragon bones as part of their remedies. These were not symbolic items or artistic representations. They were physical objects unearthed from hills and exposed landscapes across central and western China. Collected in large quantities, they were ground into fine powder and prescribed to treat a wide range of conditions, including fever and mental distress. The trade was consistent and widely accepted, forming a recognized part of medical practice. Historians later viewed this tradition with skepticism. They suggested it was an example of mythology shaping commerce, a case where belief in dragons had extended into everyday life, even influencing medicine. From this perspective, the materials being sold were tied more to imagination than to reality. The idea that people were using remains of legendary creatures seemed unlikely. This interpretation began to shift when paleontologists examined the regions where these so-called dragon bones were commonly found. An unexpected pattern emerged. The locations associated with this long-standing trade closely matched areas known today for their abundance of dinosaur fossils. In particular, many of these sites contained remains of large sauropods, massive creatures with long necks and enormous limbs. Their bones, including vertebrae and large structural elements, often surfaced naturally as wind and erosion wore away the surrounding rock. This connection suggested a different explanation. The apothecaries were not dealing in fantasy. They were collecting and distributing fossilized remains that had been revealed by the landscape itself. To the people who discovered them, These bones must have appeared extraordinary in size and shape. Without the scientific framework to identify them as prehistoric animals, they interpreted the findings through the lens of familiar stories. The concept of dragons may not have emerged from pure invention. Instead, it may have been inspired by real discoveries, shaped by observation and imagination working together. What ancient people uncovered were remains of creatures far larger than anything they knew. They recognized their significance, even if they lacked the language to describe them in modern terms. Long before Greece rose to prominence, another powerful culture dominated the Aegean world. Known today as the Minoans, they were advanced, skilled in seafaring, and influential enough that their memory endured in later Greek traditions long after they had disappeared. According to those stories, their downfall came suddenly, brought on by fire and by the earth itself turning against them. For many years, historians treated these accounts as symbolic, believing they reflected exaggerated memories rather than real events. In their view, civilizations usually decline through gradual processes such as economic disruption, internal conflict, or shifting power structures, not sudden natural destruction. That perspective began to change when scientists examined physical evidence from the region. Geologists studied core samples taken from the seafloor and discovered distinct layers of volcanic ash. These layers pointed to a massive eruption from the island of Thera, located north of Crete. Modern analysis has ranked this eruption among the most powerful volcanic events in human history. The eruption did more than release ash into the atmosphere. It caused the central part of the island to collapse, triggering a series of devastating consequences. One of the most destructive effects was a massive tsunami that spread across the surrounding seas. Waves surged toward coastal settlements, striking Minoan cities with overwhelming force. Archaeological findings reveal collapsed structures, signs of intense burning, and widespread layers of ash across the eastern Mediterranean. The combined impact of fire, ash, and water appears to have brought rapid and severe disruption to a civilization that had once thrived for centuries. Within a relatively short period, the Minoan world was left weakened beyond recovery. What had long been considered legend now aligns closely with scientific evidence. The ancient descriptions of fire rising from the earth and a society vanishing were not simply imaginative stories. They may have been attempts to record a real and catastrophic event, witnessed by those who experienced it and passed down through generations as a warning and a memory. Around 325 BCE, a Greek explorer named Pytheas set sail far beyond the edges of the known world. He traveled north past every familiar map and eventually returned with a story that few were willing to accept. He claimed to have reached a distant place he called Thule. There, he described something that seemed impossible. The sea itself had changed. It was no longer fully liquid, yet not solid either. It had become a strange, dense substance that could not be sailed through and could not be walked upon, something that did not fit any known understanding of nature. Writers and scholars who came after him rejected his account. Strabo dismissed his claims, while Polybius openly called him untruthful. For centuries, the wider Mediterranean world agreed with this judgment. They believed Pytheas had either invented the story entirely or had lost his sense of reality somewhere beyond the northern seas. The idea of an ocean behaving in such a way seemed absurd to those who had never experienced anything like it. That perception remained unchanged for nearly 1,000 years. Then modern researchers began to compare his descriptions with what is now known about Arctic regions. his account began to align with surprising accuracy. The location he described closely matches areas such as Iceland or the coast of Norway. The strange substance he observed corresponds to sea ice, which behaves exactly as he explained, shifting, dense, and difficult to navigate. Further details strengthened this connection. His notes on extended daylight during summer and the unique behavior of the ocean in those northern latitudes all matched real environmental conditions. Each element of his journey, once doubted, began to make sense when viewed through modern understanding. Pytheas had not invented a fantasy. He had reached a place far beyond the knowledge of his time and described it as best he could. The reason he was not believed was simple. Those who judged him had never seen such a world themselves. He was not mistaken. He had simply discovered something far ahead of his era. Most people recognize the tale of the Pied Piper as a simple moral lesson about keeping promises. In the familiar version, a musician arrives in a town overwhelmed by rats and offers to remove them in exchange for payment. The town agrees, and he plays his pipe, leading the infestation away. When the townspeople refuse to pay what they owe, he returns and takes something far more precious. The children, that is, the version that has been remembered and retold for generations. However, the origins of this story are rooted in something far more grounded. The town of Hamelin preserved a record connected to a specific date, June 26, 1284. This was not a vague legend, but a documented moment tied to a real loss within the community. Early accounts of the event do not emphasize rats or magical elements. Instead, they focus on the sudden disappearance of many of the town's young people. Historical context provides a possible explanation. During the 13th century, recruiters traveled through parts of Western Germany, seeking to attract young individuals to new settlements. These recruiters offered opportunities that were often unavailable in their home regions. They promised land, independence, and the chance to build a future. At the time, inheritance traditions often left younger members of families without property or prospects, making such offers especially appealing. It is likely that the young people of Hamelin followed someone who presented them with the possibility of a better life elsewhere. Their departure would have been difficult for the community to accept, especially if it meant losing an entire generation. Over time, the event may have been reshaped into a more symbolic narrative. By transforming the story into one involving a mysterious figure and music, the town could shift the focus away from its own circumstances. The creation of a villain allowed the loss to be understood in a different way. What began as a historical event gradually became a legend, preserving the memory while altering the explanation behind it. Ancient records spoke of a lighthouse so immense that its light could be seen from nearly 50 kilometers out at sea. It was said to rise more than 100 meters into the sky, crowned by a flame that guided sailors across dark waters. At its summit, there were accounts of a reflective system designed to direct and intensify the light, allowing it to travel vast distances, even in complete darkness. While historians accepted that a fire could burn at such a height, they questioned the idea of a mirror system, believing that ancient civilizations lacked the precision needed for advanced optics. They also doubted the extraordinary height, assuming that the story had been exaggerated over time. This skepticism remained for many years until underwater archaeologists began exploring the seabed near Alexandria. As they investigated the area, they uncovered massive stone blocks, enormous statues, and fragments of architecture scattered beneath the water. These discoveries were not random. Their size and structure pointed to the remains of a single, monumental building. Some of the recovered stones weighed as much as 75 tons, far too heavy to have been easily removed or reused in later construction. This explained why the structure had not been dismantled like many other ancient landmarks. Instead, it appeared to have collapsed and settled into the sea, preserved beneath layers of sediment. When researchers compared these remains to historical descriptions, the match was striking. The scale and design aligned closely with what had been recorded in ancient texts. The towering lighthouse, once dismissed as exaggerated, now appeared to have been very real. Although the reflective system described at its peak has not been definitively confirmed, the structure itself fits the accounts with remarkable accuracy. Rather than being a product of imagination, the lighthouse stood as a genuine achievement of its time. The only detail left out of the original descriptions was its fate. Over time, the Mediterranean Sea claimed it, hiding its remains beneath the water until they were finally brought back into view. For nearly 2,000 years, historians debated a single question that refused to be settled. Which path did Hannibal take when he crossed the Alps? This was not a minor disagreement. Entire careers were built on competing theories, with scholars defending specific routes through books, lectures, and ongoing discussions. Despite all the attention, the debate remained unresolved because no clear physical evidence had ever confirmed the exact location of his passage. There was never any doubt about the event itself. In 218 BCE, Hannibal led an extraordinary campaign, guiding tens of thousands of soldiers, thousands of horses, and dozens of war elephants across the mountains during winter. It was one of the boldest military strategies ever attempted, striking at Rome from an unexpected direction. Such a massive movement of people and animals should have left a lasting trace on the landscape. The answer eventually came from an unexpected source. A team of researchers approached the problem in a different way, focusing not on written records but on the ground itself. At a mountain pass known as Col de la Traversette in the French Alps, they discovered unusual deposits of disturbed soil along with preserved organic material. These findings were dated to the same period as Hannibal's campaign. Closer analysis revealed something even more specific. The soil contained high concentrations of bacteria, commonly found in the digestive systems of large mammals. This type of biological evidence suggested the presence of a significant number of animals passing through the area at that time. When considered alongside historical accounts, the scale of the findings matched what would be expected from Hannibal's army. After centuries of speculation, the mystery was resolved through careful scientific investigation. The debate that had persisted for generations found its answer in the most unexpected form. What scholars had searched for in texts and theories was ultimately discovered in the physical traces left behind. The journey of Hannibal, once uncertain in its details, became clearer through evidence that had remained hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. In Irish tradition, people spoke of a presence that was never seen before it was heard. The banshee was known not by appearance, but by a chilling sound that echoed outside homes in the quiet of night. It was described as a long, piercing wail, intense and unnatural, carrying a message that was impossible to ignore. According to the belief, hearing this cry meant that someone within the family was close to death. The banshee did not offer a warning that could be avoided. She delivered an announcement that felt certain and final. For many years, scholars explained this story as a reflection of human emotion. They viewed it as a symbolic expression of grief and fear, suggesting that cultures often create figures to represent the anxiety surrounding death. In this interpretation, the banshee was not real, but a way for people to process loss through storytelling. This understanding shifted when anthropologists examined a traditional Irish practice known as keening. This was not a random act of mourning, but an organized role within communities. Certain women were chosen for this purpose and developed the ability to produce a powerful and sustained cry. Their role was to mark the presence of death and communicate it beyond the immediate household. These women would arrive during the night and perform their wail outside the home of the deceased. The sound carried across fields and into nearby dwellings, ensuring that others in the area became aware of the loss. The intensity of their voices, combined with the timing and purpose, created an experience that could easily be misunderstood by those unfamiliar with the practice. Over time, the memory of these moments may have transformed. What began as the work of real individuals fulfilling a social function could have been reimagined as something beyond human. The certainty associated with their presence, always linked to death, may have made it easier for people to believe in a supernatural figure rather than recognize the role played by someone within their own community. Alexander the Great extended his rule across nearly every land within his reach, building one of the largest empires of the ancient world. Yet accounts preserved in medieval writings from Persia, Arabia, and Europe suggest that his ambition did not end at the shoreline. According to these records, he sought to explore what existed beneath the surface of the sea. The story describes him entering a transparent vessel and descending into the water, observing the creatures below before rising again to recount what he had witnessed. For centuries, historians dismissed this account as clear fiction. The image of a ruler, placing himself inside a glass container and sinking into the ocean, seemed more symbolic than historical. It was often interpreted as a narrative expressing limitless ambition, a metaphor for a man determined to conquer even the unknown depths. This perspective began to shift when scholars reconsidered the technological aspect of the story. The idea of a diving bell, a sealed structure capable of trapping air while submerged, does not require materials or knowledge beyond what ancient societies possessed. The basic principle relies on simple physics, allowing air to remain enclosed within a descending chamber. Evidence supporting this possibility appears in ancient texts. Aristotle, who was closely associated with Alexander as his tutor, described early forms of such devices used by divers in the Aegean region. Similar concepts also appear in sources from India and China, dating to comparable periods, suggesting that the idea of underwater exploration was not entirely unfamiliar across different cultures. The vessel described in the story may not have been imaginary. Instead, it could represent an early application of practical knowledge, adapted for a purpose that seemed extraordinary at the time. What had long been treated as myth may reflect a real attempt to explore an environment that few had ever considered entering. If this interpretation holds true, the story captures something remarkable. It portrays a figure who, after reaching the limits of land, turned his attention to the only direction left unexplored, driven by curiosity as much as conquest. Boudica was a leader in ancient Britain who, according to Roman writers, led a revolt so destructive that it reduced 3 Roman cities to ruins in a single campaign. These accounts describe her forces' overwhelming settlements, causing massive loss of life and bringing Roman control in the region to the brink of collapse before she was eventually defeated. The Roman sources recorded her actions in detail, yet over time historians began to question how much of this story reflected reality. The image of a native queen destroying fortified Roman cities seemed like the kind of narrative an empire might amplify to justify a harsh response. By portraying the enemy as exceptionally dangerous, the retaliation could be presented as necessary and justified. As a result, Boudica's story remained uncertain, positioned somewhere between historical record and political exaggeration. That uncertainty began to fade when physical evidence started to appear beneath the modern city of London. During construction work, workers repeatedly encountered an unusual layer beneath the ground. This layer was dark red in color and extended widely across the area that had once been Roman London. Closer examination revealed that this layer contained clear signs of intense destruction. There were traces of burned grain, fragments of melted pottery, and remains of buildings that had been reduced to charred material. Scientific dating placed these remains around the year 60 CE, aligning closely with the period of Boudica's uprising. What made the discovery even more significant was its scale. The destruction was not limited to a single structure or neighborhood. It spread across the city in a consistent and widespread pattern. This evidence pointed to a deliberate and large-scale event rather than an accidental fire. It suggested that the city had been intentionally devastated, matching the descriptions found in Roman accounts. The physical traces left behind confirmed that the events described were not simply exaggerated stories. Boudica was a real figure, and the impact of her rebellion was powerful enough to leave a lasting mark that remains visible beneath the streets even today. On January 9, 1493, Christopher Columbus recorded an unusual observation while sailing near the coast of Haiti. In his official log, he described seeing 3 figures in the water that he identified as mermaids. He even noted that they were not as graceful or beautiful as the stories had suggested. This detail stands out because Columbus was not known for careless imagination. His work depended on careful navigation and accurate recording of what he encountered. Across many cultures, sailors and coastal communities shared similar descriptions of human-like beings rising from the sea. These figures were often called sea women or ocean spirits, appearing partly human and partly aquatic. Despite differences in language and location, the image remained remarkably consistent. A more grounded explanation points to a real animal. Large marine mammals, such as dugongs, can grow to significant sizes and display behaviors that might be misunderstood from a distance. Female dugongs often hold their young close to their bodies while nursing, positioning them in a way that can resemble a human figure cradling a child. When seen in dim light, combined with fatigue and the motion of the sea, the outline can appear strikingly human. For sailors spending long periods at sea, such conditions could easily lead to confusion. The mind tends to interpret unfamiliar shapes in familiar ways, especially when visibility is limited. What appears briefly and from afar can take on a form that fits existing beliefs or expectations. In this context, the stories of mermaids may not have come from pure imagination. They could have been shaped by real encounters that were misunderstood at the time. Observers described what they believed they saw, using the language and ideas available to them. Columbus himself may have experienced such a moment. His record reflects a genuine attempt to describe something unusual, even if the interpretation was influenced by perception rather than reality. The legend of mermaids, repeated across cultures, may have its roots in these brief and uncertain encounters with the natural world. Ancient Greek writers told of a formidable force warriors living across the Eurasian steppe. They spoke of women who rode horses with skill, carried weapons with confidence, and stood beside men in battle as equals. The historian Herodotus recorded their existence in detail, describing their lifestyle, their strength, and their role in warfare. Over time, these accounts evolved into what became known as the legend of the Amazons. Yet, for centuries, scholars rejected the idea entirely. The concept of female warriors was labeled unrealistic. Weapons discovered in female graves were explained away as symbolic or ceremonial. The conclusion seemed settled. The story was dismissed as mythology shaped by cultural fears rather than fact. That certainty began to collapse when archaeologists turned their attention to burial sites across regions that are now part of Ukraine and Kazakhstan. As they carefully excavated these ancient mounds, they uncovered graves that challenged everything historians had assumed. Inside, they found women laid to rest with swords, spears, daggers, and complete sets of archery equipment. These were not decorative objects placed for ritual meaning. They were practical tools of combat. The most revealing evidence came from the bones themselves. Some of these women showed clear signs of injuries that had healed over time. These were not marks of a single fatal encounter. They were traces of battles survived. The wounds had mended, leaving behind proof that these individuals had fought, recovered, and returned to conflict again. This was not a symbolic role. It was a lived experience. Scientific analysis confirmed their identity. DNA testing verified that these individuals were indeed women. The way they were buried, alongside weapons and with the same level of respect as male warriors, showed that they held equal status within their society. The evidence was consistent and undeniable. Herodotus had not been creating a myth. He had been documenting a reality that later generations were too quick to reject. What had once been dismissed as imagination was now supported by physical proof, forcing a re-evaluation of long-held beliefs. Stories like these were often labeled impossible by those in positions of authority, yet they endured. Not because institutions preserved them, but because people continued to share them across generations. Truth does not disappear. It remains, waiting to be recognized. Which part of this story changed your perspective the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this made you see history differently, leave a like. Subscribe to Forbidden Fathoms for more stories that challenge what we think we know.